Welcome to Unlearn, where we talk to industry leaders about unlearning how we go to market.
I'm Kelly Sarabin, and I run tech partner enablement and advocacy at HubSpot.
And I'm Asher Matthew, co-founder of Partnership Leaders.
The old ways of going to market are getting more expensive and less effective.
To thrive in an era of digital transformation, you have to go to market differently. Let's find out how. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Unlearn podcast. And, today we have somebody that we caught off LinkedIn. It's interesting because normally Kelly and I just go to our networks. And this, why don't we talk a little bit about, Nate, how you got to this podcast?
Yeah, I don't even know. I'm sure how I got to this podcast outside of
Nate just shows up where he's asked. He's like, "What is this podcast about again?"
Like, hey guys,
a meeting showed up on my calendar and I made it.
That's great.
No, I had posted some thoughts, and I think there was a bunch of people tagging on my thoughts saying, "Hey," it was probably Google people saying, "Hey, let's." Get this guy a microphone or something to that effect. And next thing you know, I'm here with you guys. So super excited to be with you. Excited to chat and get to know you better. And yeah, thanks for having me on.
Super. All right. So I think I remember this. So the way this happened was you put a post out that actually I think did the best job of articulating what a next generation partnerships leader would look like, right? And I represent a company called Partnership Leaders, like literally the name. And what's interesting is when I joined full time this year, I called up Frank Hanslick, who runs partnerships at Avalara, and he's a GM level person. And I was on the phone with him, and I'm like, hey, so what are some of the things that are top of mind for you, right? And he said, why do you know what a good partnership leader looks like today? And I paused and I said, well, actually, I don't. And so we started this thread around what does a good, or I would say great partnership leader look like? And then we realized that a lot of the folks that were partnership leaders today weren't actually looking at the complete customer journey. And there was a lot of focus on acquisition and pre-sales, but not enough on post-sales. And so we started noodling on this thread. And I went to APAC and I met with Basim, who runs partnerships at Go1, and he had his own definition about it and his thoughts about it. And then we're putting this conference called Catalyst, where this is a marquee theme. And then when you put this post out, I said, whoa, wait, this looks like an amazing post. And so let's have Nate on the podcast. So I believe that's how you got here.
No, I'm super happy to be here. And that's kind of you to say. It's funny when you pose that question. I think most people make it to partnerships in a very roundabout way. Like I didn't even know I was doing partnerships the first 10 years of my job. It wasn't even called that, right? But that's what you're doing. So it's funny, you kind of migrate into this thing and then you fall in love with it. You never want to stop doing it, right? That's the thing. You realize that there's so much bi-directional value. It creates so much value that you can't, it's almost impossible to go somewhere else, right? Because you're touching every part of a business, right? Yep. You touch marketing, you touch sales, you get ops, you get the tech side, you get the product side, you touch every part of the business, finance. Yep. And why go silo yourself in some little part when you can influence the whole thing? So
I guess as you start, tell us about your partnerships journey, just so that folks have some context.
Yeah, so I started my career in business process outsourcing. And at the time, you're lifting and shifting jobs, right? You're moving jobs offshore. That's your entire role. And it was, back in those days, it was just impossible to differentiate yourself, right? It's like, hey, what's the cost of this person, right? Because I'm gonna move this job to this country. What's your cost for that person in that country? And they're gonna do all the work, right? And we started building technologies and we started thinking through what technology really meant in that business, but we had to go find all these providers. Well, how are we going to differentiate? So here, my title was solution architect, but really what I was doing was partnership work to go find and augment our capabilities, say, oh, we're going to introduce tech here. We're going to introduce tech here in this part of the process. And so we were forming these partnerships at that time. but it was under the name of product and solution engineering. And from there I went to Wells Fargo Bank and and that's when like kind of, I mean, my whole career has been in financial services, and banking and financial services partnerships. That's how you win, right? I mean, no one realizes that your money in Venmo is sitting in a Wells Fargo account. That's a partnership deal, right? So from there, it just continued to move into kind of the fintech motion. I was a founding member of the fintech partnership team at Wells Fargo back in 2014, maybe 16, because banks didn't know how to partner, right? They're like, hey, there's all these fintechs. We don't know what to do with them. Are they enemies? Are they not enemies? What are we going to do with these guys? And let's go figure that out. But, we went and figured that out. You got to figure out all sorts of frameworks. How are we going to assess them? How are we going to move them through risk? And I think that's where this like aha moment for me was of, oh my gosh, like this isn't about just selling, right? This isn't getting a deal done. This is about like a long-term thing. I mean, when you're dealing with some of our customers that were 100 years old at Wells Fargo, and Wells Fargo was like 150 years old, you have a very different perspective of what long-term means, a long-term partnership, and they're really hard to unwind, at a bank. And so you have to think about these things scaling over time. And then it was just so fun. I jumped into the fintech side. I just saw them growing and had an awesome opportunity to just build and jump on the innovation component of that. I wanted to be on the other end of creating the future. So yeah, that's how I got here.
How would you say the sort of technical side of the fintech partnerships has evolved because of all the regulation and sensitivity around the data, right? If you look at something like MarTech, where you have APIs or like table stakes now that everybody's open to each other, right? And that's why we have over 9,000 MarTech systems, and they're all integrated. But in fintech, the journey's been very different, right? Like to even get to the point of having open APIs was a struggle. And there's just sensitivity around the nature of the data, right? And I think to your point, these old institutions who had established ways of doing things, both culturally, but from a technical perspective. So I'd love to hear, what you've seen in terms of how that journey unfolded on the more technical side and where we are today and kind of where you see that going.
Yeah, I'll tell you a funny story. This is kind of behind the scenes. I'm going to be super candid here. So while I was at Wells Fargo Bank, I don't even know if I'll get in trouble for this, right? But
That's fine.
We'll find out later, right? Part two.
Well, number 13 on your list of 12 things that partnership leaders need to worry about is like not upsetting people.
Yeah. So I remember a meeting when I was at Wells Fargo Bank. It was this like frantic conference call, and a bunch of leaders jump on and they say, hey, our servers, the compute on our servers is going crazy. Like it was just like our servers are getting hacked or something's going on. Like what is the problem? And it was like this all hands on deck emergency. And when you trace the kind of IP, Plaid's gonna love this, what I'm saying. It was Plaid. Right?
That's exactly what I thought when you started this story. I mean, they ended up just having to settle quite large lawsuit. I don't know if it was large for them, but it was definitely, I think, tens of millions of dollars they ended up having to pay.
I mean, screen scraping was just, it was just demolishing the compute. And so coming out of that experience, it was, hey, there's got to be a better way to, it was almost shocking. Like, wait a minute. People gave their credentials to log into their bank to this little fintech. I mean, this was, it sounds funny now, but at the time it was like, hang on a minute. Like somebody gave their banking credentials to this little fintech. Why would anybody do that? Like, that's crazy. You just gave them the keys to the kingdom to do whatever you want. Like, what is this? Right? It was really funny, but coming out of that, obviously there's now 10 years later, regulation with Dodd-Frank 1033 on consumer data and what that means. And I mean, I'll even go a little further into this story of, some of the individuals in that meeting were like, hey, we need a better API. We need to do this, right? We need to create access for this. And a certain individual in this company who had a substantial budget, whose boss told him, no, we're not building APIs. We will not do that. He just ignored him. Like, this is actually the real story behind the scenes of how the API, I'll call it the B2B API, got created. Is an individual told his boss and said, okay, that's fine. We're going to work on these projects. It was kind of like fix the online banking portal, fix this, fix that. Really what he did is he dumped all resources and built the API without his boss knowledge. That's the true story.
This person is ballsy. I like it.
He's amazing. He's
They
amazing.
were
He's doing amazing
right as well, right?
And now he's doing the exact. But he came back.
He's probably retired also.
Yeah, I mean, he just said, "Look, this is what we did. It's now an award-winning API for a bank, right? I mean, that's one thing. It's very different in fintech, but I mean, he took a serious leap of faith. He saw the future. But back to your question, I mean, there had to be consumer permission. We were terrified as a bank, having our data go anywhere. And in straight honesty, Venmo, who was a customer, because that's who people were connecting to, they got a dump of this data from Plaid that they didn't even know what it was, right? They're like, what's all this transactional data? Like, we just wanted to see if there was money in the account, right? Why is there 2 years of, what's all this stuff, right? We don't want that. I mean, they were kind of calling the bank going, hey, we got all this stuff we don't want. Like, how do we just limit it? A pretty interesting scenario, but I mean, you look at it today, it's being regulated. People have informed consent. They know that 2 years of transaction data, or they're being informed. There's just like a huge runway ahead to fix this. I mean, I think the FDX standard's doing a really good job of creating and building standardization around this data, because it is really meaningful for this data to get into the right hands and to empower people, right? I mean, people can now see their data in a way that they've never seen it before. The bank's going, you just robbed my treasure trove of data. Like, this was mine, right? And kind of adversarial, but I think that's all freeing up right now, right? I think that relationship has changed. Partnerships have changed. You see them deepening the relationships with these fintechs and even acquiring them to some point. But like MarTech, it needs to feel like that, right? I mean, that's a really good model. Look at this stuff, just intertwines. Build your stack, take your Legos, create this stuff, and see what happens of value. It's going to start feeling like that more and more.
It's a super interesting story too, because I think this is something common in platforms, right? Where it's like Plaid was responding to such a strong demand, a strong need, right? To have more interoperability, which is why they were able to get away with it, right? Because they did it. They later ended up having to pay out fines, but they were meeting such an important need. And I think that for platforms, right, there's a lesson there, which is, if you don't open things up, there will be players in your space who will go through the back door to get people the data they need to meet their business objectives. And it's something to keep in mind, right? Because I think a lot of times, especially these older companies, these established companies, where they think, hey, we can just continue business as usual, and we've been around forever, so why not? You will have people who will seek to do it with or without your sanction. So probably better to get in front of it and have a way to sanction it and enable it in a way that you're comfortable with, than to just completely lock down, and then you get actors who are going to go and do it for their customers anyway.
Yeah, I wrote this morning, and I'm going to post it on LinkedIn. I mean, back to this question of integration, what does that mean and what does that look like in data? I mean, there's very few. So when I was at Wells Fargo meeting with these fintechs, I met with 100 fintechs the first year. 0 of them had an integration framework with a bank or an idea of what to do with a bank.
Yep.
Right. So I I was sharing kind of the framework that I've built and used and collaborated on with others, on on how to really work through an integration framework. Like, what does this really mean? What are the things that you've got to work through, right? To build a way to connect to each other in a meaningful way that can last for a really long time. And you just don't see that many frameworks, or maybe people are hiding them. I don't know. Like it's a little baffling to me. So you've got to have some sort of process. I mean, maybe not. I prefer a process and prefer at least rules. If my company culture is trying to play pickleball and your company culture is playing tennis, right? Everything looks the same. There's baselines, there's a net, right? People have paddles, people have rackets, there's a ball. But like if you're not kind of playing the same game and the same rules and have a framework to guideline on like what you can and can't do, the rules are very different. You need to identify that up front, especially in your integration plan, right? So hopefully I'm going to put it out there. I mean, it's very high level. I'm happy to share the details of that, later, but I want a standard of that to at least have a place to start from and say, gosh, what does data look like? What's your architecture look like? Why were you architected the way you look? You were like, what problem were you guys solving? And what problem are we going to solve together now moving forward? And does this make sense? There's a lot of go or no go decisions and too many, I don't know. Now I feel like I'm ranting, but there's too many upside values to individual partners for compensation and incentives where they're like, they don't want to go or no go decision, right? They just want to close a deal. And there's a lot of checkpoints in there where you want to, especially when you're dealing with big companies and you're doing a deal with Visa or you're doing a deal with Google or Microsoft or Amazon or some of these companies. Dude, there's a lot of places that are dangerous. You got to say go or no go. And those integration frameworks help.
Yeah, no, I think you're right, and so along the lines of, I'm just going to read the 12 things that you put out, which I thought was actually a really awesome list of like things that like people that really want to be at the highest levels of partnerships should just understand, right? And even people that are like aspiring executives that actually then become executives and then they get fired and then they learn, So it's like I'm
Is
just
that
trying
a
to
key part
avoid
of the journey that you get fired?
exactly. I mean, I'm just trying to avoid that
It's
cycle
the
because
low before the high.
it happens so much, right, and it's my core belief that like we're gonna crowdsource all this stuff, and that's why partnership leaders, the company does not put out like hard content around these things because it's an evolution, right? But the list that Nate put out, right, first said the point number one was like the leading partnership leader should understand evaluating alignment structures. The number 2 point was leading product integration sessions. The number 3 point was building market analysis and landscape data. Number 4 was decisioning sales, marketing, and distribution models. Number 5 was designing effective pricing structures. Number 6 was long-term IP and legal structures. Number 7 was reviewing implementation best practices. Number 8 was capturing onboarding and delivery requirements. Number 9 was architecting communication plans. Number 10 was developing robust client support models. Number 11 was extracting reporting and analytics insight. And number 12 was building a convincing business case and budget for approval. I mean, if I look at this list, this is literally what CROs are supposed to do today. And almost, I think, like 70% of them fail at this stuff because they only come from pre-sales and they don't understand post-sales. They're trying to go learn marketing first, but then it's actually easier if they just learn post-sales first and then learn marketing and came out of it. But like there's more partner people that are have like some sort of info about those 12 topics than most sales leaders because they just rely on sales ops then, right? And partner people just don't have partner ops today. And the folks that have risen themselves or elevated themselves to operator status actually understand these things.
Yeah, it's interesting. It takes the entire life cycle, and a lot of that's like pain, right? I've been through the pain of each one of those steps of not doing that step, right? I think about like not doing the right IP step. We were we were right in the midst. I was working for a company called MX Technologies, which is a Plaid competitor, by the way. Um, so I went from Wells Fargo to the Plaid competitor because I saw a lot of opportunity there. But we were working on a really cool deal, and it was a three-party deal. So it's MX Technologies, Google Cloud Financial Services, and then large financial institutions. and you're in this like moment of hey, we're going to take a part of us, a part of you, and then the data from you bank and do this thing together. And you can imagine the amount of attorneys and discussion around IP structure of, hey, what's going to happen when we identify X, Y, and Z? Who owns that? Right. And you always hear this like, hey, we're going to do this partner 1 + 1 = 3. It's like, yay. Okay. But who gets
And then everybody becomes
2.1
conservative very quickly.
and who gets 0.9 of the 3, right?
Yeah.
Or who gets 1.6 and who gets 1.4 of the 3? And when you have 3 or 4 parties involved, you're dividing that like equal to 3 thing. It's really complex. There's a lot of slippery ice right there,
Yeah.
that can cause long-term pain. So you got to solve for that early. I mean, those things that you listed out, like if you take like our pipeline today at Loan Pro, all of that stuff's got to be done before proposal, right? So that's stage 4 for us. So partner, like on our partnership team, we're trying to draft that stuff
Yeah.
before we
But
get
this
to
is great. I
proposal.
mean, it's almost this is a cool point because after I talked with Frank, I got on the phone with my good friend Arnie, right? And he's a CRO. And literally the first thing he says, well, Asher, there's a lot of shitty partner people out in the world, huh? And I'm like, well, this is going to be a great podcast. Right. And from there, actually, I realized, right, like that most partner people actually miss rigor. And it's exactly what you're talking about right now, is that you can't skip the steps. It's not cool to just go hang out at a bar and stuff like that. I think that all stuff is necessary in itself, right, but the rigor actually wants other people who are already operating at that levels really want to work with you, because now they're working with someone who understands how this thing operates and how to scale it, and it actually makes the relationship much more enjoyable. So rigor is not, I feel like a lot of times like rigor is viewed as like a red tape and this and that, etc., etc. I think actually like rigor actually brings top quality people together.
No question. I mean, everyone, the kickback, or I would say the pushback I've had in the past on doing some of this stuff, they're like, Nate, you're slowing the deal down, right? You're going to slow this deal way down, or you're creating too much chaos in the deal, or there's too much conflict in the deal.
Yep.
And it's like, look, when that comes out, that's where you really find out who's who, right? Like that conflict's really important in the deal because you're going to see how they react. So, like, let's say 10, I don't know, 5 years down the road, your partner releases a competitive thing, and all of a sudden they're taking some of your market share, and you were supposed to do that. And they learned, like, you're going to get in this conversation about that. You're going to know how they're going to react, or when you need them, like, hey, this is a real problem, like we need you to step up, like look at this data, we need your help. They're like, vacant. You're going to know that now. Wouldn't you rather know that before you like sign a deal? I would. Like, so
Talk
yeah,
talk to us a little bit about unwinding partnerships. I don't know if anybody's actually spent much time on this part, and I know you mentioned it, right? And I can clearly see, because the scale that you're operating, and for those people listening, bank systems are not like iPhone systems, right? Like they're very legacy. They were or architected for security and like speed and things like that. So when you have to unwind one of these things, it takes a lot of time.
So think about this. At Wells Fargo, they had 1,600 core systems. So in any other world, that would be like 1,600 ERP systems, or
Yep.
1,600 like whatever that is, right? That's the main operating system that you live in. Like you build to that thing, it's like going to stay there forever. They're designed to be off the internet. They were designed to never be on the internet, right? Because they didn't want anybody like getting around that stuff.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
when you talk about unwinding, I mean, you look at, I'll give a really, I mean, the example that comes to my mind was a lawsuit that USAA, had some really cool IP technology about taking a picture of your check, right? And there's all this cross operability between banks, and all of a sudden a lawsuit. I'm sure this is all,
Yeah, it's probably
out in the world, but they hit big banks with lawsuits, right? Like saying, hey, you've disrupted my IP. Well, there's also this like operating agreement that we're going to move money together and we're going to like help support you do stuff and you're going to take overflow. And so this lawsuit shows up for $300 or $400 million. And some relationship manager is like, well, I do the relationships with USAA. How are you going to operate and how are you going to like unwind and untangle that stuff and negotiate some of that stuff? Look, if you do these deals right, you kind of have those trigger events in the contract to pull you together and say, hey, when this stuff happens and we have conflict, we're going to get back together and start having a discussion. If we can't figure that out, then we're going to do this. And if we can't figure that out, then it's going to get to attorneys, right? And that's where you don't want to go. Nobody wants to go there.
But Asher, are you talking about when you say unwind partnership, are you talking about the end of a partnership? Because that's inevitable, right? And I agree, we don't really talk about it that much. And maybe part of the solution that you're saying, Nate, is to try to think it through at the beginning. Yeah. Right? Like, it's kind of like, I don't know if prenup's the right word, but kind of like making sure that you're foreseeing that there's going to be a situation where the partnership may have to end. And how do you do that in a peaceful, respectful manner?
I mean, there's some of that's like part of the areas that like sometimes you have to isolate areas where they're not going to play and they decide to play. Right? That's a great example. Yeah. Is, hey, you're not going to do this. We are going to do that. And all of a sudden you see them start doing this or the thing that they said they weren't going to do. Well, what are the trigger events? Yeah, like we came on to like talk about building partnerships, and now we're talking about like how do you kill these things?
I mean, sometimes they have to die, right? Like, and it's not malfeasance
for sure. I mean,
it could just be also platforms change, technology changes, right? Like there's reasons, a whole spectrum of reasons of why partnerships might have to end.
Also, any day we do this podcast where it's an odd number, we just talk about death. Friday the 13th, Friday the 23rd, they're all in the same thing. No, the reason why I said this is because sometimes, because of the macro changes, and this is like a lesson we should all know about from the last 36 months, a partnership has to be terminated, so a new partnership is formed based on the new realities of the world. Oh, yeah. Right? And there's like 8 billion people in the world, and no company can serve 8 billion people by themselves. Like it doesn't exist, right? And so most companies, it was interesting because I was in Denver and we were sitting down and having this conversation about how the U.S. government really makes it difficult for solopreneurs or like sole proprietorships to exist, right? Because we all in venture land like can raise money based on our networks and stuff like that. Like solopreneurs have a really hard time even buying houses, right? So then the conversation became like, well, how many solopreneurs out there, right? And so there's about 29 million businesses that are registered. Maybe it's like 31 million million businesses that are registered, and I believe about 22 of them or 23 of them or maybe 24 of them, right, like are sole proprietors. And then this is like this is like people that are registered, right? And then off the 7 million, there's only about like 15,000 companies that are over $1 billion in revenue, and that's who we all compete on, by the way, right? Yeah. But the scale of what those 15,000 or 16,000 companies that are over $1 billion do, and how much effort it takes to win all of their business, right? Like share of wallet, if you talk about it, is a lot, and nobody can do this by themselves. Like even Microsoft cannot do it.
Oh yeah, yeah. No, it's just getting better. Like I feel like the partnership role is finally getting some, like there's some cloud around it. Like you see, I mean, I love that you're posting, hey, congratulations, so-and-so, you're a chief partnership officer, right? Yep. There's a seat at the table in an executive suite for the partnership person to have a say, who's typically rolled up under a CRO or a head of revenue or something to that effect.
Or whoever cares or doesn't care about it.
Yeah. but what I see now, right, is that these people are really like hinged into product, right, in a new way. Yeah. Right? They're inventing the thing. They're helping build and create this new 0 to 1 or whatever you want to call that. And they have so much more influence on like the strategy of the business. And then it's like, hey, we're gonna go figure this thing out and then hand it to revenue and say, here's here's repeatable, here's rinse, whatever,
Yeah,
rinse
yeah,
and repeat
yeah,
platforms. But the real grit, rigor, partnership people,
yeah,
right? The like, I don't know, the operators,
yeah,
and they are like with product, they're with founders, they're in there, they're
yeah,
building, they're creating, and they're launching this stuff that then says, hey, we proved it, it's going to be awesome. Here's another 8 years of revenue for this business. And then they're on to the next thing saying, okay, I'm going to go find another 8. Like
yeah,
that's the fun part,
yeah.
right? That's where whoever's out there aspiring or growing or trying to think about where you want to be, I will tell you right now, there is just gallons of satisfaction in that part of the business, and getting to that part where you get to build and create with the product people or with the founders and set strategy and say, okay, here's this thing that just brought so much revenue or is going to bring so much revenue. I mean, if I could spend all of my time doing that, that's what I do. I mean, it's just the
Yeah.
funnest thing in the world.
That's really interesting that you say that, because Asher and I ran a survey last November of 650 partner people. And what we found is that most partner teams are still reporting to the CRO. But what companies that were smaller than 2001 employees, they all said technology partnerships were the most important partnerships for the organization. Now, enterprises basically said it was the second most important, behind like channel partners, which is part of that model that has existed for decades. But I'd be curious your thoughts on that, right? Because insofar as you're reporting to the CRO, there's going to be some tension there for technology partnerships and how close you are to product. I will say I work at HubSpot on the technology partnerships team, and we do report to product. The solutions partner team reports up into the chief customer officer.
It's
But
because you don't
curious,
have a chief partner officer,
what's that?
It's because you don't have a chief partner officer.
We do not have a chief partner officer.
Exactly.
But yeah, I'm curious what your thoughts are.
I'm gonna change that, and then this problem was. I'm just kidding. Maybe I'm not actually, but
The way I think about that is that you have to earn your place as
yes.
a partnership person, right? So when I joined MX, partnerships was, I would say, reported up into the CRO, right? Within kind of 6 months, all of a sudden there was this huge shift of like, wait a minute, like the partnership deal, like these guys are doing, they're working with Visa, they're working with Google, they're working with Microsoft now. Like they've never brought that before, right? Like what is that? And it migrated out to the chief product officer, and it was like, no, I got this. And it just kind of pulled the partnerships into product, right? To say, hey, we're designing something very special here. This needs what I call the day walker. It's like the tech savvy deal maker, right? Someone that can read APIs, they can understand what the technical integration piece, but they know how to do a deal and a deal at scale. And it just kind of pulled it over. So we had to earn the right to do that, right? It's the same thing where I'm at Loan Pro today. It was a very different motion. It was kind of like product-led growth at Loan Pro, but now like everything that partnerships does goes right to the founder and to the product team, right? It informs and is basically like feeding back information to the CRO and the revenue side. But they also have now shifted, and they love this, right? They love like, oh my gosh, I get this voice of the customer because I'm on the front line listening every day. Take it to the partnership team and say, hey, look, this gap, this gap, this gap. Like, do we fill it with partners? Where is it on the roadmap? And they start playing this other role, right? It's highly supportive. And I would say like minimal contention. But if you're in high growth, like add more salespeople, just add heads to grow at all costs because we have an easy button of venture capital, like what 2000 and whatever 20 was, 21, 19, like that's different. It's just like all roads are on like grow revenue, grow revenue, grow revenue. We'll figure out how to operate it, and we'll hire a bunch of Ivy Leaguers once we do our thing and get our exit to actually operate the business.
Hire an adult later.
Yeah, like it feels like that sometimes.
And we're paying the price of that right now. Like that stuff is being unwound right now, right? And every day you're like,
it's layoffs, right? It's because
70%
people were just binging.
70% people, 75 people are left, and people are like actually understanding how to take the demand that's organically existing and not actually manufacture deals, but actually just let them come to you, which is technically how, if you have an amazing value prop and an amazing product, or I would say you have an amazing value prop, good product, and really great marketing, you're still going to get there, right? It's not like you won't get there.
Yeah, but partnerships, I mean, in my mind, like partnerships, they're going to accelerate that, right? They're going to help that. They think different, right? Those people think like the very first thing in their mind is like, hey, what value am I going to drive for this partner, right? And what value? It's very like bi-directional in their thinking. Like they operate totally different. They're like engineers, right? They want to solve problems. They think about stuff. It's not just like,
Scalability and
okay,
systems.
how do I navigate this deal and get to the right person and influence this thing because I got to get this contract signed for my quarterly thing or whatever that is. And I'm not saying all salespeople are like that. Like I don't want to like say that, but very rarely, and I've met with a lot of companies, right? Having worked at Wells at scale, like meeting with those teams, like partnership people will think different. Like they're altruistic oftentimes, right? They want to do good, and the really good ones think about like, well, what's this impact? What is my action? What's the reaction, or how's this going to impact the other person I'm working with?
Yeah, I want to double think a little bit of what you said about earning the right, right?
Yeah.
And I want to play a scenario for our listeners. It's like, so you roll up to the CRO, and now you want to be a peer to the CRO, right? This or the CMO, right? Now, if you come up with like wacky ideas all the time, and the ideas aren't formulated, and they aren't ready for scale and stuff like that, the CRO and the CMO are already dealing with an individual like that called the CEO.
Yeah.
So they're not going to be like, oh, let me just add another one to the list so I can go like completely do this, right? And we all know this happens, right? Like CEOs go on fishing trips, boating tours, there's F1 races, they come back and they're like, oh, dude, this is the answer to my problems. Let's go figure this thing out. And all of a sudden, the executive, right? So that's one piece.
And
right?
Asher is the CEO, and this is the feedback he's gotten from his team.
Yeah, for myself. I'm like, hey,
stop going on the fishing trips.
Actually, no. You are correct. Correct. Even at a small company like Partnership Leaders, right? Like the way I was operating last year was like Uber sales guy. This year, I literally on like December 31st, as I was going full time, I said, guys, you're going to see a remarkable difference. It doesn't mean that I'm disconnected from the system. I have just seen 4 CEOs go through this transition of like how they fired themselves every year and rehired them for the next role. Is very difficult, but you have to do it intentionally, right? But anyways, that's like a sidebar. But I just wanted to share that like the earning the right actually requires intentionality, and this scenario does play out in CROs because I did go from a VP of Biz Dev to a CRO, similar to how Nate went from from a partnership leader to an innovation leader. Is just a very different role across the org, right? But then the second piece of this is like really understanding who your team is, because like when you fire yourself as a functional leader, let's call them a channel chief, right? And then you go to an operator, your team is actually like everybody else on that C-suite table. And at that point, they're not looking at you as the person who is only responsible for partnerships. You're responsible for the entire business, just like the CRO is also responsible for the entire business, right? And it's because the comp models are all aligned. Like they all work off of bonus plans, right? And so I wanted to kind of double click on this because this is an amazing episode, by the way, because we talked about unwinding stuff but really earning the right. We have not talked about this even before, and it applies to every role, but specifically to partnerships role because we're in the state of transition.
Yeah, it's funny. I was just thinking about like the org that you design. I mean, I had relationships and deep relationships and trusts from the ecosystem. So when I came to this CRO, right, I was coming with this army of, say, the head of financial services for Google Cloud. Like, hey, here's this person. We both believe in this.
Yep.
Right. And we want to do this, and we need resources to do this. And for a little small fintech, it's just like, oh my gosh, like we've had that person in an account map, and we've been trying to figure out how to SDR into that guy or that girl for who knows how long. And you just like brought this person in and said you've been working with them for 6 months because you had this idea and you want to build this thing. So there's moments of relationship, and these things really matter over time. I mean, I look at the deals that I do now, and I'm 23 years in. I mean, I've got 5 years, probably 5 good years left, and I'll be forgotten. But
That was a dark turn.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's just
I'm just saying, so those 23
I wonder
years,
what we're going to title this episode.
I built relationships that I go back to all the time, and they come to me. I mean, it really is like, I mean, these people moved from Amazon to Stripe, and from Stripe to Visa, and they just bring you into stuff because you've built this network of trust that, hey, we're going to operate on a level that really works, and we're going to be frank with each other. But I say that because you're able to bring those people in. So bring that partner, bring that executive, create this vision. I mean, you have to sell that. Like exactly what you're saying. It's like the CEO's got all sorts of ideas. We were laughing. I was just laughing so hard about that because we've all experienced that and experience it every day. But you've got to like bring a plan and a point of view and say, this is why this matters. And look, here's our OKRs. These are our top 3 things that we care about. Look how this applies to what that is and what we're trying to do long term, and present that internal business case. I mean, the very last thing on my slide, like we're in stage 4, you're presenting a business case to a CRO, to your founder, and they're presenting it to their business, like in stage 4 of the deal, to say, are we going to do this? That's where you earn the right, in my opinion. Well, that's how I've earned the right, is saying, look, I've really thought about this. Like, it's not just fly by night. This is how it applies. And by the way, here's all these milestones where we can say no. Like I gave escape routes and like ejection buttons all over the place to say, look, you're in control. Like, let's just see if it happens. This is your call. You're the leader. Right? It's your job, but you can hit that button anytime and eject, and no one's going to be offended because we've already talked about it.
Yep. What's the story behind the shoes?
So this is going to be a little vulnerable now, right? There's some like, as I was thinking about that.
That's okay. Kelly says I'm vain all the time.
I grew up, so I grew up super poor, right? It was a single mom, like she was a teacher. Like I had a job when I was like 13 years old, and I mean, literally left my house as a junior in high school, and kind of supported myself because it was just like a burden off my mom. But I lived in this like little, I don't know, like I lived in this little corner of this neighborhood that was the poor group, but everybody around me had these like mansions, right? And so their dads were like, oh, I'm the chief legal officer at Huntsman Chemical, and this guy, he's like running Marriott hotels, and this guy owns this huge thing. But anyway, like that was like Jordans had come out like right at that time, right? That was like just an emerging thing, 1986, and I'm like right in the mix of all of that, and I could not afford a pair of Jordans. There's just like no way that I was ever going to do that. And so some of that probably is just like me going, I'll buy as many of these freaking things as I want now, right? Like, and I'm going to feel good about doing it.
That's great.
But, it's actually really fun. My kids love it. It's really like a family thing where we're on the hunt. We only buy on the drop, right? So we're not buying secondary market. So we're all on our phones, like on the day of the drop, hoping we get the $150 pair of Jordans. So we only go for those. But it's been super fun. Like my kids love it. I love it, and it's just been a great thing. It's been like a great family thing, and probably a good emotional thing for me.
We have not had a guest that has Shishuk.
That was a good origin story. And also there's a partnership angle, right? Because I don't know if everybody's seen the documentary. Actually, no, it was a dramatic retelling of the story of how Michael Jordan made the deal with Nike. Super interesting, right? Basically, it was a new model at the time where he took a share of the profits of the shoe, which was not the common model at the time, and obviously that turned out really well for him and his estate. But it was an interesting story how he kind of single-handedly. Well, in the movie, they should think it's portrayed as his mother pushing it. I don't know how accurate that was, but him and his family pushing this concept of I'm going to put my brand and my likeness on this, and I'm going to be motivated properly to do it. and get the return behind it, which I think is definitely a partnership story.
Kelly, I love that you brought that up. It is really such a cool point to be able to just kind of whitewash the existing on the partnership deal, and you don't have to look at your existing business and say, hey, what's the art of the possible on this thing? How would we price this? Like, how do we do this differently? Because it probably hasn't been done, and you have to think creatively around that. Like, what are the impacts? What's the downside? What's the upside? Is the upside worth it? Like, I love that you brought that up. That is, like, to me, for sure, the funnest part, to say, hey, we're going to create something that's never been done before. Right? Like, this is going to be something we go back to and love and talk about. And our kids, we can tell our kids, it'll be like the fun story for grandkids that, hey, my dad was a part of that, or my grandpa was part of that. I mean, that's what we should be striving for as partnership leaders, right? Yep. Like, build that thing that's meaningful, that has real impact, that lasts.
Yes, it's scalable.
Great.
Well said.
Thanks.
On that note, we're going to bring you back on the podcast. And all of our guests, we've opened the conversation with, and you're like, this podcast is called Unlearn. So we're basically unlearning all of the things of the past, and that at least are on go-to-market, that aren't just not working anymore, or we believe that aren't going to work anymore. And so the conversations that we have on this podcast are just not around partnerships, even though, like, we both, Kelly and I, love partnerships. That's why we're doing this. But as we go on to, like, hopefully a great weekend, are there other people that are maybe in partnerships or maybe not in partnerships, just pure and go to market, right, that you think, that you recommend that we would enjoy connecting with, or that our listeners would enjoy learning from?
Oh yeah, I mean, I have like this endless list of like the hidden heroes of partnerships, you know, that are kind of out there. You know, oh man.
Take two, for example. Who are the top two that you recommend?
So, I mean, Imran Haider, who is now running, he just took a job at Intuit to build, you know, a really cool, like, new API for Intuit. I mean, this guy is a builder, but true partnership maker. And you're just not going to hear this guy. I mean, he's behind the scenes, he's in product, he's doing his stuff. You know, the Stripe people, Nate Starrett is probably one of the single most talented partnership people I've ever worked with in my life. And he doesn't have a partnership title. I mean, I think his title is probably like corp dev or, you know, kind of sits in the M&A frame of things. But that individual has reshaped my thinking entirely on how to think about deals, how to prepare for deals, how to prepare to unwind deals, like you've said, like how do we just anticipate this? Man, Nate would just be, he's just a super, super sharp dude. Like, he knows how to do it. And Peggy Mango, I don't know if you know Peggy, she runs fintech partnerships at Chase now. She very innovative. She was at PayPal Ventures for a while. Like, she's just phenomenal. I love her to death. We worked on some really cool stuff together when we were at Wells Fargo. Like, she got a very different view. Like, everybody has their own thing, right? There's not this like silver bullet. Like, one of my best mentors is like, hey, there's no silver bullets, just a shit ton of like lead ones. Excuse the but I mean, she's kind of like that. Like, she's got this cool vibe to her. But yeah, those come to mind.
Okay. That's great. We would. I know you're in partnerships, and we normally don't like talk about stuff like this. But our event Catalyst is in Denver. It's August 21st to 23rd. If you have time, we'd love to have you there, because what we're doing is we're creating a full blown conference, extremely high quality, only for partner people. I mean, everybody's invited, but it's time that, like, partner people got their own, like, really high quality experience.
Yeah, I'm in. Whatever I can do to support it, I love that. Like, that sounds amazing. I would love to participate. I'll make time, put it on my calendar, and get out there for sure. It's great.
Super. All right, cool. Nate, thank you so much.
Yeah, so good to meet you guys. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you for listening to Unlearn. Subscribe wherever you listen and visit unlearnpodcast.com for the transcripts.